Let's get more on this now with Sami Hamdi, who joins us from London. He's the Managing Director of the International Interest. Welcome back to the program, Sami. We know this month marks the seventh anniversary of this civil war in Yemen. There are estimates that around 300,000 people have died in that conflict. Explain to us, what is the current state of that conflict right now?
The current state is that we are still in a civil war with no end in sight. The reality is that the US has been pressuring Saudi Arabia to engage in peace talks. Saudi Arabia has demonstrated an indication that it is ready for peace talks. The GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is made up of the Gulf states, invited the Houthis to participate in talks in Riyadh. The Houthis rejected because the Houthis believe that there can be no negotiations until they take a province that is called Ma'rib. Ma'rib is an oil-rich, resource-rich province. The Houthis believe that if they go to negotiations now, then any settlement that takes place will dilute the power that they have secured via military gains. They believe if they take Ma'rib, however, they will be able to carve out an autonomous region in which they will be able to rule alone without power sharing in some sort of northern Yemen, and that the de facto situation with regards to the military control on Sana'a and Hodeidah and the growing apathy on the part of the US towards the idea of supporting Saudi Arabia's bid to restore the internationally recognized government. The Houthis believe there can be no negotiations until they take Ma'rib, and they also believe that the international focus on Saudi Arabia, the international focus on bin Salman's atrocities, the international focus on his transgressions creates an environment in which the Houthis are able to really have this breathing space by which they can continue their military expansion, continue their military drive, as the emphasis is on getting Saudi Arabia and the UAE to stop their bombing campaign, as opposed to the Houthis, whose military expansion in 2014 is what sparked the civil war in the first place.
And what about this humanitarian crisis? Because as this conflict continues to drag on, we know that millions of Yemenis are suffering. Many of them are starving to death, according to many NGOs. The UN has said it needs around $4.3 billion to tackle this crisis. Do you think the international community will step up and give the money that's needed?
I don't think the international community will necessarily step up to give money that is needed. We've seen these donor conferences before, and they rarely produce the money that is needed, primarily because there is this sense that the humanitarian crisis is a symptom of the war and cannot be resolved unless there is a resolution to the war itself. And there is an acknowledgement, an implicit acknowledgement, that the parties are not yet ready to sit down and talk, particularly when it comes to the Houthis. And this is why I think that when it comes to the idea of rectifying the humanitarian crisis, of providing aid, of raising money, the reality is that when we look at the overall picture, Yemeni activists have asserted for a long time that this is an avenue that benefits the Houthis, who have sought to control Yemen and restore a hereditary rule over Yemen, in that the humanitarian crisis actually benefits one of the parties in the war, and that is the Houthis, because the humanitarian crisis takes the responsibility away from the Houthis and imposes a collective blanket responsibility that pushes for a solution in which all of the parties sort of come to this agreement whereby they recognize the de facto situation, they recognize Houthis' de facto change, and the reality is that the humanitarian crisis, when you focus on it, leads to a solution whereby democracy is deprioritized, and the priority instead is on finding any solution, even it's recognizing the Houthi coup. That's the tragedy of Yemen. That's the catch-22. That's why it's difficult to find a resolution to it.
And in one of his first addresses as US President, Joe Biden pledged to end this war in Yemen. He said, quote, that he would stop all American support for offensive operations in Yemen, including relevant arms sales. He continued on by saying that he would stop the US and Donald Trump's blank check diplomacy with Saudi Arabia. Has any of that come to bear at all from the Biden administration?
The Biden administration has taken tangible steps with regards to the Yemeni conflict. They've announced that they will no longer support Saudi's war in Yemen. They've withdrawn a number of missile systems from Saudi Arabia that were supposed to protect Saudis from the Houthi drone missiles. They've sent an envoy, a U.S. envoy, Tim Lenderking, who told Congress that the U.S. is not necessarily opposed to dividing Yemen between north and south, the implication being Houthis in the north, southern separatists to the south. We've seen that Biden has been trying to talk to the Houthis through Oman. We've seen that Biden has sent the UN envoy to speak with the Iranians, to get the Iranians to try to get the Houthis to come to the table. But Biden has been stunned and left reeling by the manner in which the Houthis have dragged their heels, primarily because he's always believed that the fault for Yemen lies with the Saudis and lies in Riyadh. And it's becoming abundantly clear for the Yemenis, that for Biden at least, that the root cause is that the Houthis don't want to talk. And now the US are at a loss, or Biden is at a loss. So it's not that Biden doesn't want to implement his promise, is that as he's tried to, he's realized the situation is very different from what he originally anticipated.
Okay, Sami Hamdi, we will have to leave it there, but thanks as always for sharing your analysis with us. We appreciate it.